All right, folks. What is going on, everybody? Thank you very much for joining us here this morning. My name is Kevin Whinnery, and I am the head of developer experience for Retool. And today I'm very, very excited because we get to take sort of a first look at a new feature that just launched in Retool. So if you log into your cloud accounts for Retool, you'll be able to do everything that you can see in the webinar here today. And that feature is the new sidebar component in the UI builder. And this is one I'm really excited about because I joined Retool a couple months ago. But before that, I spent about 10 years at a company called Twilio. And we had an API for sending text messages and doing communication stuff. And we had this massive internal tool that we used every day for everything from like creating promo codes to managing account data. And the only thing that kept that huge application like even modestly usable was a left-hand navigation component that kind of let you make sense of all the different little sub apps that existed in the tool. And the sidebar component that we're about to see today is squarely focused at a similar use case, and I'm really excited to start using it in my own applications. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we get rolling. Number one, because I know it's always a question that is in the top of folks' minds, we are recording the presentation here today. Everybody who has registered for the event will receive a link to the recording, so no need to take screenshots or extensive notes or anything like that. We'll be sending out that recording to you coming up very quickly. In terms of asking questions, if you have any questions for us during the event, we actually have a couple of folks from the Retool team that'll be sort of, in the chat answering questions. Also, you can use, if you look down in the lower right-hand corner of the Livestorm UI, there's a questions widget. And that's a great way to ensure that like we see your question and we will definitely address it at some point during the presentation. So in addition to the chat, I definitely encourage you to make use of that questions component as well. Also, in a few seconds here, my friend Liza is in the chat, and she'll actually be dropping in a link to a blog post, which will contain some downloadable sample apps and a little bit of a deeper dive into the content that we're going to go through in this webinar too. So be on the lookout for that. So just to quickly recap, agenda for this morning is going to be, we'll actually invite up in a few minutes Bob and Maya, who are the engineering and design duo that created the sidebar component. They'll tell us a little bit about the why behind the component. We'll also get a quick demo of sort of the basic functionality of the sidebar. And then after that, we'll go dive into a few of the more advanced features. We'll actually look at how you can dynamically generate the contents of a navigation controller, which is a part of the package of updates that are launching today. And we'll also show how you can do a multi-page navigation within Retool apps, which is really, we think, going to be a major use case for the sidebar. And after that, we should have plenty of time for all the questions that come up in Livestorm and any questions that come up in the chat. So make sure that you're registering those questions as you have them. So at this point, I would actually like to invite to the stream both Bob and Maya, who are the development and design talents behind the sidebar components, to the presentation. Maya, Bob, how are you doing? How is the morning going for you out west?
It's going great. Really excited to be here.
Yeah, really excited.
Yeah, I'm super stoked as well. So if you wouldn't mind, actually, Maya, maybe I'll throw it over to you first to just kind of quick introduce yourself, and then Bob will get to you after that. But Maya, just maybe say a few words about what you do at Retool and kind of how you got to the place where you're at today.
Yeah, so hi, I'm a designer at Retool. I mainly work on the core product, so everything related to components, layout, and the editor UI itself. Yeah, that's me.
Sweet. And Bob, your turn, my friend.
Yeah, hi, I'm a software engineer here at Retool. I think most of my work so far has been really focused on the sort of core editing experience, as well as like unlocking, new UI paradigms inside of Retool applications. So things like Sidebar, which I'm, really excited to be talking about today, have been things I've been working on recently.
Yeah, so it is a special treat to have both of you on. And for those of you in the chat, this is a great chance to ask questions of two of the major brains behind what most people consider to be the Retool platform, like the app editing experience. So if you have questions about, certainly about the sidebar component, which we're going to talk about, but anything related to editing UIs and creating UIs in Retool, excellent chance to ask two experts. But we are here to talk about something new and shiny, which is the sidebar and the navigation component. And Maya, I think you were kind enough to prepare just a couple opening remarks about sort of why we built the sidebar, some motivations, and sort of like a high level overview of what's sort of what's in the box in this release.
Yes. Yeah, thank you, Kevin. So I am going to give a quick overview of how this feature came about, what functionalities are included, and also how to use it. So let me share my screen. Awesome. So for background, when Retool first started, it was only possible to build single screen apps. But we quickly realized that our customers are not just creating isolated screens. They are building systems, they are building platforms where the workflows are interconnected and people need to use multiple apps in conjunction to do their job. So that's why we added a header frame last year. This offers a quick way to create multi-page apps with a simple header navigation. And after the launch, we got a lot of feedback around adding more flexibilities. And one of the most frequently requested features is vertical navigation. So that's why we are introducing the sidebar frame today. So with this launch, you can now add sidebar frame to any new or existing Retool apps. The sidebar behaves just like a container where you can drag any components inside, so you don't have to use it for navigation. You can also use it, use a sidebar in combination with the header as well. In addition to the layout, you can also add, you can also dynamically control the visibility of the frame, create responsive layout like hamburger menus, and build custom navigations. So the navigation menu doesn't have to link to just external apps. It can also switch views of a container, scroll to a specific part of the page, or trigger custom event. So I'm gonna change gears a little bit and give you a quick demo to show how to create a sidebar from scratch.
Yes, here we go. And this is actually in everybody's Retool instance today that's using cloud. They can actually just like go into their apps and do what you're about to do, right? And just add sidebars to existing ones.
Yes, exactly. So cool. So I'm going to start from creating new app. And to add a sidebar, you need to first go to the left-hand side panel. So if your left-hand side panel is not open already, you can click on this button or press Command B to toggle it on and off. And from here, we click on the Create button. So we will see the sidebar being generated with the header slot, body, and also footer, and also automatically generated components in each area. So as I mentioned before, the sidebar is just like a container. You can customize in whatever way you want. So you can delete components, drag new components inside, and also customize the interactions and appearance of the components. So for the navigation component itself, we made it super easy to sort of create nested menus, and also add icons, custom event handlers where you can trigger queries, control components, or go to a Retool app or existing app. One thing that's really cool is we also made it super easy to create responsive layout. All you need to do is turn on the mobile visibility of the sidebar frame and then click yes. You see the hamburger menu already working automatically. We have set up the layout for you already. So yeah, that's everything I want to show.
Yeah, that's awesome. So yeah, that's kind of the basics of like how you would incorporate the sidebar into a new application. You saw like how you can add components to either like the header, the main content, or the footer, and you could also like disable the header and the footer too. So if you just wanted to fully control that sidebar layout, that's available too. So super easy to get started with. And I think Bob, you are actually going to show something I'm pretty stoked on, which is the ability to sort of dynamically create the contents of a navigation controller or a navigation component, excuse me, which is usually what you would often have in a sidebar, as well as some ways to do like handle multi-page navigation as well.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So I'm gonna do a few little walkthroughs today. And again, I think there's like a lot of really good stuff in here that I'm excited to show. So I think to start, as Kevin mentioned, we're just going to show off like the abilities to dynamically create basically your navigation component. So to start, I'm going to make a blank app here, and I'll just call this, nav component example. And since navigation, the upgraded navigation component is just like any other component inside of Retool, I'll sort of search for navigation. I'll drag it into the application. And by default, if you sort of drop it into the mainframe of your application, you'll get this horizontal layout. But yeah, as Maya mentioned, like, we had this before, but you can actually just one click change it to vertical. There's a bunch of alignment options that have been added to like the horizontal one. There's a lot of really powerful things here. But yeah, I want to talk a little bit about like, dynamically generating this. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up this query. And I've used like the Retool API generator, and I basically just have this query that will grab a list of, this is fake information, but basically representative of maybe some customers that we might have. So they basically come back with an array of 25 items that have IDs, URLs, names, and locations. And I think for clarity here, I think I'm going to call this, get customers. So we've got this query called get customers, and there's a whole bunch of stuff in here. Now, let's say I wanted to add these to our navigation component. We could do this manually, right? Like, and manually is a very powerful way, especially when you're sort of like working in very sort of fine-grained control things, or you want things that maybe come from a few different areas that you just sort of want to have like deep manual control over. But you'll also notice that we've added this mapped mode, which exists in a lot of our other Retool components today. So things like our select component have this sort of manual versus map mode. We now have this in the navigation. So for this exercise, I'm going to switch over to mapped mode. And I'm going to set the data source to be this get customers array. And by default, it does, select the item.name for each one of these. And it basically says, what do we think we want people to, what do we think this component is trying to display here? And in this case, we've got item.name. Now, I think this is cool, but I think we can go a little step further. So as Maya showed us, we actually have built-in nested support as well. So let's say if I sort of look at this data, I see that all these users are based in the US, and so their location has city, state, country. So maybe what I want to do instead is nest all of these based off of their state. So from there, I'm going to basically change the parent label to be item.location.split at the comma and grab the element in the first index. And so now what we've got is this currently horizontal navigation, structured by state at the top, with an automatically generated set of customers based off of their state, sort of nested in there. I also noticed that I'm gonna put this back to vertical just to sort of show that, again, even in horizontal versus vertical, that all these things work exactly as one might expect. Now let's go one step further though, of course, as well. We've got all these users, they're nested by state, but they also have URLs. And so right now clicking on them doesn't do anything because we haven't wired that up. And, if we were doing this manually, we might have to go through 25 individual times and sort of, say this person, links to this URL. But since we have this in our, our data, we can actually just go to our event handlers, which exist on our Retool components. And we're basically going to say, on click, what do we want to do? Well, we want to go to a URL. And what's the URL? Well, in this case, we're just going to say item.url. And let's sort of, see this. Let's click on Gina from Florida. That's great. That opens up SourceForge, which is exactly right here. We see here in item number 2. So all of these navigation items have just been basically dynamically generated based off this mapped data that came back from our query. So I think this is a pretty powerful, way of generating a really strong and really nice component with just a little bit of code, and having your data already there is very nice. Yeah, sorry,
Nice.
Kevin, were you gonna say something?
No, I was going to ask. So, like a use case, like I was actually talking about a little bit. A company I used to work for was kind of restrict what was available in the left-hand navigation based on like your role in the organization. So, like this is probably a way to do something like that, where you can customize the navigation based on like what people are supposed to be able to see.
Totally. Yeah. Let's walk through a further scenario here, right? So this was a little bit about like, automating and being able to generate this. We haven't actually used this in many places yet. So let's walk through a different example that we will definitely touch upon, sort of ability to see things or not based off of roles. So I'm going to create a new module here, and I'll just call this, shared navigation for apps. And a module, much like our applications, we can drag in whatever components we want. So yet again, I'm going to drag in a navigation. I'm going to set it to vertical. And this time I'm going to do this manually. So let's say basically what I want to do here is there are 3 applications that I know I use pretty often and pretty, regularly and in tandem. And I want to sort of be able to get between those 3 pretty easily. So what I'm going to do is basically modify this navigation component to link to all 3 of those. Then I'm going to go to each one of those 3 applications, add in a sidebar, add in this module, and then we'll be able to see the linking sort of working everywhere. So yeah, I think those applications are called basically, we'll call this, the intake form is one, and then maybe we've got another one called the inventory management application, and we'll add one other, which I think is our customer list. And so this is a module that links to these. It's a module that includes a navigation component that has links to these 3 different apps. So I'm going to go ahead and just jump into this first application, and let's utilize it there. So if I go to the sidebar here, again, on the left-hand side, as Maya mentioned, and I create a new sidebar, we get the 3 default things as one expects. But I want to replace this navigation with the one that I just created in a module. So I'm going to go ahead and select it. I'm going to delete it, and I'm going to just add in our shared navigation that we just created. Awesome. So one thing that might have stood out to you as we just dragged this into the intake form is that this automatically knows contextually like where this module is being rendered. And so since we use the manual mode to sort of link to our applications and we are on the intake form application, it's automatically highlighted for us. And this looks really nice, like immediately, even in our sort of, use mode of this application, this just works, which is awesome. So I'm just going to do exactly what I did to this app to the other 2. So again, we'll go to this other application, add a sidebar, and let's go ahead and drag in the same sort of shared module here. We'll put that there. Great. Inventory management listed in blue. And then let's do it to our last application here as well. And great. So now we have 3 applications that are all basically linked, all using a shared navigation on the side. And sort of as we click through and navigate between these applications, it feels really natural. It feels really nice. These are all sort of, linked together. So yeah, now with all of that in mind, to Kevin's point, right? Like now let's sort of talk about like what it might mean to make this even more contextually aware. And by that, what I mean is let's go back and edit this module. And let's say there's a 4th application. Oops. Let's say there's a 4th application that we want to add here. We'll go ahead and add this other application. And it's one that's called Bob only. And this is my application. I only want people with the first name Bob to be able to see this. And so I'm going to change the logic here that says, this element in this navigation is hidden. Basically, if current user.first name is not equal to Bob. And since I am logged in as myself and as Bob, I will be able to see that, right? So if I go to sort of our intake form application and I click on it, all the applications that we're using this module now get Bob only. Now, I'm going to go ahead and switch to a different user. So I'm going to a different browser window over here. And I'm just going to go to a application that we have. We'll call this one customer list. Same application. This is the same exact URL. And it's using the same module, but I'm logged in as a user with the first name Robert, and it no longer shows up here on the sidebar, which I think is really great. I think it at least shows the power of sort of how you're able to customize these things. But I would not utilize this as a security protocol overall. But I think it's a good demonstration for now.
You mean like string manipulation and inspection is not like the height of security that folks should look to apply to their applications? That seems fair.
Yeah, I think that seems fair. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Well, that's great. And I actually just looking at the chat here a little bit, and I would agree with this. Unfortunately, Livestorm's having a rough day today, and the screen resolution is a little bit low. Maybe what would be cool, just real quick, is Bob, if you could try to bump up your font size, even just like a couple levels, like just a quick Command plus, and maybe go to the edit mode. And one thing that we that might have been missed is just kind of like how you set up the event handlers. So maybe if you could just look at the event handlers real quick.
Absolutely. So event handlers for the mapped mode or event handlers for the manual mode, I'd be happy to do both real quick. So
yeah, let's do both real quick.
One of the nice things about sort of, manual mode, especially with like the default version, is that it will link to apps by default. And if you're just linking to apps, you don't have to do any additional event handlers. Now, we didn't go through this specifically on this one, but if we wanted to customize the event handlers, if you just sort of switch over to custom, you will get your own sort of event handlers as you would set up for all the others. Now, I think the other one that I was showing off earlier was basically this nav component example where we set them up sort of automatically across a bunch of mapped things. Now, this is very similar to a lot of all of our other components that exist inside of Retool. So while we set up sort of, which elements show up in mapped mode, and again, that was over our sort of our API response here, we just scrolled down to the event handler section, and I'll go ahead and do this again. We scrolled down to the overall event handler section for this navigation component. We clicked add, and we basically say, what is the event that we want to handle? And in this case, it's click. So on click, what do we want to do? What we want to do is change the action. We want to go to a given URL. And, the next thing that we have to provide to it is, what is the URL we want to go to? And so as a reminder, before I fill this out, actually, the data that we get back from our query currently is basically an array of objects, and each object has ID, URL, name, and location. And so if I want to set the URL to be, each user's individual URL, what I do here in the event handler is just set the URL to item.url. And in this case, item is one of those things that Retool has sort of built in, especially in these mapped modes, that basically says, in the given item, you can access whatever properties exist off of it. So if you sort of highlight over it, it sort of shows, in this case, the first one as a sort of representative evaluation of what we have here. But that sort of works across all of our items here. So yeah, hopefully you can see a little bit better. I apologize for the poor resolution, but yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Thanks for going over that again. So yeah, so that when iterating through item, like if you've used Retool a little bit, you might have used other stuff like a list view is the one that might come up a lot, where there's that magic variable I that represents like each item as you're iterating. So that it's a similar set of behavior that you're seeing here for the configuration.
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, very cool. Thanks for the demo, Bob. So I think at this point that those are the bits that we wanted to point out, at least at a high level of, how do you get started? How do you add the sidebar to new or existing applications? We looked a little bit at some of the new features of the navigation component specifically, and then also kind of looked at how you would set up multi-page navigation using the left nav, which is a pretty common usage scenario in a lot of like internal apps or like console style UIs where you might have like more complex navigation. So those are kind of the core use cases, but we'll post the link here again in just a little bit to the blog post that kind of describes a little bit deeper into some of these features, and also provide some screenshots and also example applications that show how you can create designs that utilize the sidebar and the navigation component. So definitely check out the blog post. You can download JSON files which represent a few of those demos, and you can import those into your Retool accounts, and you can kind of play around with it and see how you can approach some of these designs. So with that, what I think we're going to do is actually turn it over to all of you for any questions that you might have about the sidebar component, about building UIs in Retool generally, and we'll get to as many of those questions as we can before we have to say goodbye. And it looks like we do actually have a number of them. So let's take a look into the questions and see what we have. We have many of them that have been answered already, but let's grab one from Brad, which is there a best practice for doing a collapsible sidebar? Or like maybe like what are the approaches to doing a collapsible sidebar?
I think, Maya, do you want to talk to some of the sort of UX patterns around that? And I'd be happy to jump in around some of the other things as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So when to use collapsible sidebar, I think that really depends on your use case, how important it is for end users to see all the menu items. So like if it is really important for them to like understand the overall structure of the sidebar, then I would just make it persistent and not collapsible. But if the structure is less important, or if you want more sort of horizontal space to display the main content, then I would change it to be a collapsible sidebar. And oftentimes what you see is when people have a responsive app, they're displaying the content in a smaller screen size, they may need to change the sidebar to be responsive and collapsible. So yeah.
Yeah, and then I would just throw in there, right? Like, given that this does have an API for sort of handling this programmatically, right? I think there's a lot of flexibility and sort of exploration that still can be had around sidebar. So we're really excited to hear, what people build with this. And I think like, given where we're already at today, I think this is like super powerful. But I'm sure it's going to get even more and more powerful, based off of feedback from folks.
Yeah. So I also just shared my screen quick to show one of the examples that's available in the blog post. If you're looking for some guidance on just like how to technically implement a collapsible sidebar, the way that it ends up working out is you have buttons or other user interface components within the UI that actually call a JavaScript API on that you can actually reference the navigation frame from like JavaScript code that you write. And you can call like set hidden with a Boolean that'll let you kind of programmatically show and hide the filters as well. So an example of this component is available in the blog post as well. And I got to stop the inception. Oh no, with the screen sharing, go away. All right, so let's see if we have some other questions coming in as well. So lots of good work being done by Larry, who is also a member of the team working with Bob and Maya, answering questions in the chat too. So a question here is, Patrick asks, what I'm trying to do is to be able to select 2 rows in a table, grab the details of the data from the database, and then display it side by side. There's a lot of data to compare. So the table is not, getting the job done. Loading the data in different containers would be wonderful. So it sounds like maybe like what Patrick would find useful is like a split view of some kind or of something that's maybe a little more balanced in the UI. And that's something that we're thinking about doing at some point, right? Is like having sort of dynamic widths for the sidebar component and like maybe being able to change the position of it at some point.
Yeah, these are definitely things where we've been, not only have we looked at, just sort of internally as we've sort of used it ourselves, but very much so rely on people's, hearing their feedback, understanding, where might this be useful, right? And so like, I think this is totally understandable problem that I think Sidebar can definitely help solve right now. And, looking forward, I'm sure there will be even more things that it can become even more applicable for.
Yeah, good question. So I see there's a couple folks in the chat like asking questions about like not being able to see the option to create a sidebar in their account. We can definitely double check the rollout to cloud accounts. But I think if you are on the latest version of Retool Cloud and to note, like definitely it's not available in the on-prem versions of Retool as yet. If you're in the cloud version, you should be seeing it. If not, we'll definitely double check that and ensure everybody has access. And some excellent feedback around documentation too that we'll get to, about enabling the sidebar. A question from Jose: is there a way to add to the left-hand sidebar things like the typical recents or if we're used to pin rows, like similar to the favorites at the top of, Notion. And that seems like a pretty common pattern, right? Like you can customize the left-hand navigation menu with favorites and pinned items and that kind of thing. Maybe Bob, would that be like a use case for dynamically creating the contents of like a navigation controller? Or maybe maybe you and Maya both could weigh in on how you'd maybe approach that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start and then Maya, please jump in. Yeah, I think this is something that is possible, right? And I think that speaks to the power of sidebar and navigation as it stands today. Is like there's so many things that we can do. So I think off the top of my head, right, like utilizing that sort of shared module approach that I demoed off a little bit earlier would be a great way to sort of say, here's my favorites, right? Like here's my favorites, and then as you know. If those favorites change over time, whatever, you just edit the module and then they sort of become available to all the applications that are utilizing that module. I think the recents and stuff like that, I think are a little bit more interesting. They're a little bit more tech heavy, but I think ultimately if you have a place in which you've stored your recents, then being able to utilize the mapped mode over that sort of recents array and then sort of render that as a navigation is absolutely something we should do. But would love to hear, Maya's thoughts on sort of the UX and UI side of this.
Yeah, absolutely. That's right. We intentionally designed the sidebar to be very unopinionated. So it's essentially just like a layout building block. You can use it for a variety of different use cases, put any sort of components you want. And yeah, that's definitely like, one of the use cases you can have for the sidebar.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And another great question actually from Bryce about like what actually constitutes a multi-page app in Retool? Is each page a separate Retool app linked together with this navigation component? And that's actually a good question about like, I would love to hear from both of you about like what architectures you see customers using. My understanding is that it's kind of a best practice to use that navigation controller to switch between multiple, much smaller, like discrete Retool apps, right? So that you don't have like, dozens of queries and all kinds of JavaScript logic happening in the same apps. Is that a fair thing to say?
Yeah. I think there are like, it really just like depends on your use case and also like what kind of experience you want your end user to have. So like you can use it for cross-app navigation. In that case, you would just have multiple Retool apps. Or you can use it for in-page navigation, which I talk a little bit in the blog post. So you can divide your content into multiple views of a container and have the navigation link to specific views of that container. So yeah, there are like multiple approaches.
Yeah, and I think to totally piggyback off that as well. As it is right now, like as I sort of showed in the example between these multiple different like pages, right? They are all separate Retool apps, and I think both to Maya and Kevin's points, right? Like to provide sort of a really good UX, both from a end user standpoint as well as if you're editing and changing these Retool applications as well, it's way easier to sort of keep inside of your mind, what is this one sort of application doing, and then linking over to another one which might have a completely different set of tasks that it's oriented around. So currently right now, I think like utilizing these sort of shared navigation via module, whether it's in the sidebar frame or in the header frame or something like that, and being able to sort of jump between these multiple applications right now is sort of what constitutes these inside of Retool today.
Nice. And I'm going to go off script a little bit here, Bob and Maya, and ask like, is it possible to nest the navigation controls as well? Like, could you use like navigation in the sidebar, which then has like a container that has its own navigation inside of it? So you could kind of create multi-level navigation that way too.
Go ahead, Maya.
Yeah, absolutely. You can definitely combine multiple navigations together, but just like keep in mind that the more sort of levels of nesting you have, the harder it is for your user to grasp the structure of the app. So I would use it, conservatively and keep the structure of the app simple and straightforward.
Okay, so avoid navigation component turducken as much as possible. Check. We'll keep that in mind. All right. Let's see what else we have in the questions. Is collapsing the sidebar in the editor on the roadmap? I find myself switching between editor and preview a lot and like to get a sense of what the end UI looks like. Yeah, that's interesting. So like in the editor, maybe going to that preview mode without leaving the editor experience, or yeah, are there some things that the team has been thinking about in like how to kind of see that end user experience within the context of the editor?
Yeah, I'll just say absolutely. This is something we are like very interested in solving, because as we sort of have this sidebar, and especially in sort of the mobile view, the mobile edit view is a little bit different than what actually shows up on the presentation, in the sense that the mobile sidebar slides out, right? There's a sort of animation that doesn't exist in the editor mode, and so there's a ton of sort of UX challenges that come into building an editor that sort of encapsulates and sort of makes it very clear what's going on as you sort of make edits. But then also there's a whole set of challenges like being sure that the sort of actual end user mode of this looks just as great. So we're absolutely looking at like ways to make this a little bit clearer. And yeah, I don't know if you got anything else to add to this, but we're really grateful to hear this feedback already.
Yeah, absolutely. We are thinking about how to make it faster to like switch between edit and preview. So yeah, that's definitely something we're thinking about. Yeah.
Absolutely. And here, I'm actually going to jump in and speak to another question. Patrick asks if like they, they're able to bring up a question of just something that they're struggling with. It's probably not like the best forum right here, but the forum that you do want to ask that question in is the community office hours. So if you go to community.retool.com, there's a link to register for an upcoming office hours session. And those sessions are run by Victoria and Kabirdas on our support team, who are awesome and know all kinds of things about how to debug and get to the bottom of many different issues in Retool. So if you are having like a specific problem, you're really stuck and you think like rubber docking it with somebody in the Retool team would help, definitely go sign up for the community office hours. And I suspect you'll get some good help there. Let's see what else we have on the questions. Make sure we're getting to all these. So the sidebar and vertical layout option for the navigation component appeared for Eric, which is great. It sounds like we actually, scrolling the responses, Larry has been working furiously behind the scenes, and it looks like we did have a minor issue, like rolling out this feature to 100% of accounts. So we're debugging live here on the webinar this morning with feature flag rollouts, which is super exciting. But hopefully it will show up for folks to start experimenting right now. I'm scrolling. If you have other questions, feel free to drop them in. We have some chat activity I'm going into, but I'll just try to make sure and see that we've answered all of these questions. So we have another one about like, is it possible to not render container tabs unless active? So the only options are hidden or disabled. So I imagine like, the context here is maybe you have, a component that you want to still take up or that you don't want to be a part of the UI at all, unless, a certain condition is true. So like, maybe in a React component, a equivalent would be like, you might conditionally render a chunk of the DOM or not. Is that like a concept that exists, like building UIs in Retool at all, of like just not including something in the DOM at all or in the application layout?
Yeah, in the sense that there are, right. So there are hidden and disabled states that I think also subcategory of those are, whether or not, I'm forgetting the exact nomenclature, but it's like whether or not it should continue to take up space when it is hidden. And so by some combination of hidden plus should this take up space or not should get you to that sort of state, right? And so like, is it possible to not render a container tab unless it's active? Yes, so there should be a hidden, you basically change it to dynamic mode rather than just say straight Boolean. And you can have it basically say, based off this condition, if this container tab is active, we will make this, not hidden. And then in any other case, we will have it hidden and make it not take up any space. That should be possible, but would be happy to, follow up if there are further questions on that one.
Yeah, that would definitely be a good one to bring to office hours too, of just like, all right, here's my situation, here's what I'm trying to do. And like getting to a response live there might be useful. Another question from Martin, and I think a big win of this particular feature is that it helps it unlocks options for more complex architectures that include multiple applications that all work together. And the question is, how do you best use the sidebar with modules? Are you better off linking to lots of small apps, or have one larger app that uses a lot of different modules? And I think the party line here is that lots of small apps is usually the best way to approach, doing more complex stuff in Retool right now versus a big app with lots of modules. Does that vibe with what you two have heard as well?
Yeah, I think just in general, Sidebar introduces net new capabilities, but at the same time, it's very much so very comfortable and should be very familiar if you've used other things inside of Retool. So at the end of the day, right, sort of best practices should still carry over, right? So yeah, I think generally smaller apps linked together, maybe via some amount of shared module sidebar, maybe navigation component, or maybe some other sort of logo stuff is probably the best way to go about it. But Maya, if you got any thoughts, would love to hear them.
Yeah, I think smaller apps in general are better for performance as well and easier to collaborate. So yeah, we would definitely encourage folks to create more sub apps and less just putting everything in one place. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the pattern that Bob showed earlier of you create the navigation component in a module that you then share in n number of smaller applications is kind of maybe what we would consider the best practice at this point. And then maybe we'll try to sneak one more question in, and then we'll say goodbye to folks because we want to be respectful of folks' time and end as close to the 40 minutes as we can, which is, we had a question around, could I use Retool to build public-facing applications too, instead of just internal applications? And one version of this is that you certainly can. In the documentation, there's, you can check out embedded applications, and that's a way where you can take a Retool application and just put it in any web page. And you could certainly expose that to a broad audience. Even within Retool itself, there's a way to make an individual application available with a publicly accessible link on retool.com. But that embedded use case is what is going to happen more often than not, and what we've seen customers deploy more often in production. That being said, it's not the most common use case of Retool, and you may find yourself a pioneer in that way and kind of finding some sharp edges of the platform in trying to use Retool as a way to build public-facing apps. But it's definitely something that's on our roadmap of things people would like to do with Retool. But Maya and Bob, are there any technical landmines that folks should be aware of if they're trying to do something public, like a public-facing app with Retool?
Well, I think there's a number of things. And yeah, I think to Kevin's point, right, we definitely want to, what we've seen so far has been a lot of this embedded sort of usage of these types of things. I think the authentication story gets a little bit more interesting in sort of public applications, and probably not one, I think to Kevin's point as well, be a little bit more pioneering to sort of handle authenticated things inside of public facing applications. So again, not something that we have an amazing story on, but we are again listening to folks and would love to hear sort of use cases for that as we might continue to expand this over time.
Awesome, cool. Well, I think then with that, we'll probably wrap it up for today. But again, the action I'll leave you with is, we'll put the link to the blog post in the chat one more time. We definitely encourage you to check out the post we put together that explains the feature. It also has some downloadable sample applications that kind of show the new sidebar off. As I said before, we'll be sending the recording of this session out to everybody who registered, so you can feel free to rewatch it. And there's also information in that blog post about how you can reach out to the team and offer us feedback on the new feature. But thank you very much once again to Maya and Bob, the stars of the show, the brains behind this new feature, for hanging out and dropping some science on us this morning. Very much appreciate that. And thank you to all of you for hanging out. And we are very excited to see what you build with the sidebar and the new navigation component. Thank you very much, everybody, and we'll talk to you again real soon.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.